state of mankind. How much do you know? Excerpts from How the Spectre of Communism is Ruling Our World. 61. Education plays an important role in fostering individual well-being and self-fulfillment, maintaining social stability, and securing the future of a nation. No great civilizations in the history of humanity took education lightly. The object of education is to maintain humanity's moral standards and preserve its divinely bestowed culture. It is the means by which knowledge and craftsmanship are imparted, as well as how people are socialized. Traditionally, the well-educated respect heaven, believe in gods, and seek to follow the virtue of benevolence. They possess extensive knowledge of traditional culture as well as mastery over one or more trades. Dedicated to their vocations, they believe in treating others with kindness. They serve as the pillars of society, national elites, and the guardians of civilization. Their extraordinary character and behavior earn divine favor and blessings. To destroy humanity, the communist specter aims to sever the connections between man and gods. Thus ruining traditional education is an indispensable step. Communism adopted different strategies to attack and undermine education in both the East and West. In Eastern countries that are home to deeply seated cultural traditions, deception alone is insufficient to dupe an entire people. This necessitated the systematic slaughter of traditional elites so as to physically cut off the bearers of culture from imparting their heritage to the next generation, while at the same time bombarding the rest of the population with incessant propaganda. The history and roots of Western culture are comparatively simple, giving communism fertile ground for covertly contaminating society by subverting and sabotaging Western education. In fact, the corruption of Western youth is much more severe when compared with those in China. During the 2016 U.S. presidential election, the mainstream media's long-standing vilification of conservative candidates, coupled with misleading polls conducted prior to the vote, left many in shock, particularly young college students, once the actual result of the election was announced. Following Donald Trump's victory, a ridiculous phenomenon appeared in universities around the United States. Some students felt such fear, exhaustion, or emotional trauma from the election that they demanded classes be canceled and exams be rescheduled. In order to relieve students of their stress and anxiety, some prominent schools organized various therapeutic activities. These included playing with Play-Doh or building blocks, coloring, and blowing bubbles. Some even provided pet cats and dogs for students to console themselves with. Many universities provided students with psychological counseling, organized help groups, and established services such as post-election recovery or post-election resources and support. The absurdity of how a normal democratic process became more terrifying than a natural disaster or terrorist attack demonstrates the utter failure of the American education system. College students, who should be mature and rational, became intolerant and infantile when confronted with change and adversity. The complete breakdown of American education is one of the most distressing things to have happened to the country in the last few decades. It signals the success of communism's mission to infiltrate and corrupt Western society. This chapter focuses mainly on the United States as an example to show how education in free societies is sabotaged by communism. Readers may apply the same logic to infer how education is being undermined in other countries along similar lines. The communist infiltration of American education manifests in at least 5 areas. Directly promoting communist ideology among the young. Communist ideology gradually took over Western academia by infiltrating important traditional fields of study, as well as fabricating new sciences beholden to its ideological influence. Literature, history, philosophy, social science, anthropology, law study, multimedia, and other concentrations were inundated with various derivatives of Marxist theory. Political correctness became the guideline for censoring free thought on campuses. Reducing the young generation's exposure to traditional culture. Traditional culture, orthodox thought, genuine history, and classical literature are slandered and marginalized in many different ways. Lowering academic standards starting in kindergarten and elementary school. Because instruction has been progressively dumbed down, students of the new generation are becoming less literate and mathematically capable. They possess less knowledge, and their ability to think critically is stunted. It is hard for these students to handle key questions concerning life and society in a logical and forthright manner, and even harder for them to see through communism's deceptions. Indoctrinating young students with deviated notions. As these children grow older, the concepts instilled in them become so strong that they are nearly impossible to identify and correct. Feeding students selfishness, greed, and indulgence. This includes conditioning them to oppose authority and tradition, inflating their egos and sense of entitlement, reducing their ability to understand and tolerate different opinions, and neglecting their psychological growth. Communism has achieved its objectives in nearly all of the 5 areas. Leftist ideology is the leading trend in American universities. Scholars with different ideas have been either marginalized in their teaching positions or barred from voicing their traditional views. 4 years of intensive indoctrination leave college graduates with a predisposition for liberalism and progressivism. They are likely to accept atheism, the theory of evolution, and materialism without a second thought. They become narrow-minded snowflakes who lack common sense and pursue hedonistic lifestyles without taking responsibility for their actions. They lack knowledge, have a narrow worldview, know very little or nothing about the history of America or the world, and have become the main target for communist deception. In the eyes of the world, the United States is still a major country in education. For over a century, the United States has been a political, economic, and military superpower. The funds it spends on education far exceed that of most countries. After World War II, American democracy and affluence attracted talented people from around the world. Its STEM graduate programs and professional schools are second to none. However, a crisis is unfolding within. The proportion of foreign students in graduate STEM programs far exceeds that of American students, and the gap is increasing with each year. This reflects the erosion of elementary, secondary, and post-secondary education across the United States. Students are purposefully being dumbed down and ruined. The consequences are unfolding before our eyes, and there is more yet to come. KGB defector Yuri Bezmenov, introduced in Chapter 5, described in the early 1980s how communist ideological infiltration in America was nearing completion. Even if you start right now, here this minute, you start educating a new generation of Americans, it will still take you 15 to 20 years to turn the tide of ideological perception of reality back to normalcy. A third of a century has passed since Bezmenov gave his interview. During this period, even as we witness the downfall of the Soviet Union and other socialist regimes in Eastern Europe, communism's infiltration and subversion in the West didn't stop in the least. Communist elements in the West set their sights on education as a primary target. They took over the institution at all tiers, spread their influence in family education, and promoted their own twisted theories on education and pedagogy. It should be emphasized that more or less all people in the world, especially those who went to college after the 1960s, received exposure to communist influences. The humanities and social sciences are the worst affected. Most people in these fields were unknowingly indoctrinated, and only a few individuals set out to intentionally promote communist ideology. Here we expose communist aims, so people can identify them and distance themselves. From Chapter 12, Sabotaging Education.